So our workshop today, host today will be our good friend Frank Liddy, who will be speaking with Judith Ragir. Frank is the co-founder of the Belfast Black Mountain Zen Center and another initiative called Compassionate City Belfast. Today, Frank is in conversation with Judith Ragir. Judith is a Dharma teacher and was instrumental in founding the Clouds of Water Zen Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, where she was the guiding teacher for 9 years and is currently senior Dharma teacher emeritus. An accomplished artist, Judith makes Buddhist-inspired quilts, which are on display in Buddhist centers across the United States. In the 70s and 80s, Judith was a dancer in the Trish Brown Dance Company in New York City and also appeared in 2 one-woman shows of her own choreography. After her dance career, she was a doctor of Chinese medicine using acupuncture, acupressure, and Chinese herbs until she became a Zen priest in 1996. Judith is also a gifted writer whose writings have appeared in many anthologies. Her recent book, published last year, is titled Untangling Karma, Intimate Zen Stories on Healing Trauma. Untangling Karma is a memoir of accepting and healing personal trauma, both on and off the meditation cushion. Judith has been active in our 12-step recovery communities for over 40 years. Their conversation will last for around 45 minutes or so and will be followed by Q&A. This is a 90-minute workshop. Judith, thank you so much for joining us today. And Frank, thank you as always. I will now pass it over to you, Frank.
Thank you. And a big thank you, Patrick, and all of the Berlin group. And a big thank you for everybody who has joined us this evening. So it's good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Belfast here, beautiful Belfast. And Judith, good to see you. Judith and I met, we talked on Zoom about just over a week ago, and we connected right away. So Judith, I'd like to begin by a deep bow, Roshi, a deep bow. And if you don't mind, Judith, would you like to lead just maybe a 5 or 10 minute meditation for the group?
Okay, good. All right, so everyone, get into a body position that suits your body. And turn your light inward. And you can close your eyes or you can keep your eyes open with a very soft focus. And the first thing I want to do when I meditate is to arrive. To arrive in this moment with these sounds and these body sensations. And we're on Zoom. What is this moment? And can you arrive? That means letting go of what's already happened today and allowing yourself to have full attention, soft, loving, mindful attention to the present moment. And there are 4 foundations of mindfulness, which we'll go through a little bit, which is mindfulness of the body, feeling your body as it is right now, and feeling how the body connects to the earth. Gravity pulls us to the earth. The weight of our body rests on earth. May we rest ourselves on earth. And just scanning the body for any tension. There will probably be some. And just inviting the body to relax as much as it's able. And then we notice, if we're in our bodies, that there is actually movement in the body. And that movement comes from our breathing, the rhythm of our breathing. And breathing is a very traditional placement of our attention when we're sitting, is noticing the rhythm and the movement of our breathing. You just have to be with your breath. You don't have to control it or change it. The body knows how to breathe, thankfully. So we just have to be with our breath. And there's a very natural expansion of our energy, and then a soft release and coming more towards the center and expanding, and then coming back in to ourselves. It's kind of like the ocean, the waves of the ocean. They're always happening, sometimes big, sometimes small, but there's a rhythm of the tides, the breath as the tides of the ocean. And let the breath rest in the body and the body rest on earth. I love this little aphorism. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, just to be. And usually there is some flavoring in our emotional body or in our heart, some feeling tone that you might be able to become aware of. And again, that could be all over the place, from peaceful to angry. It's just what is emotionally happening right now. And I call that the melody. The melody of our heart is the ups and downs of our emotions. And again, they don't have to be controlled. They are what they are. But it's also helpful for me to hold them in awareness, just a little bit of mind consciousness of what my feelings are, and then to hold them in kindness or gentleness or unconditional love. So as I always bring in kindness or gentleness into my meditations, and especially around my emotions, holding my feelings with kindness or compassion. And we have a lot of energy usually in our heads, in our brains, in our minds. And inviting that energy to settle down, exhale it down into the weight of the body. And let your troubles, lay your troubles down. Lay your troubles on earth. The earth that receives everything. No evaluations, it just accepts. And it's not so great to fight your thinking. That brings more agitation. Just let your thoughts flow through your brain. Sometimes I think of it like a cloud going from one ear to the other ear and out. And if your mind is very agitated, then please hold it. Just get a tiny bit larger than your agitation and hold it with compassion. And sometimes the relaxation or the slowing down of your breath will help you slow down your thoughts, but not always. So meditation is about being alive in this moment, really owning the vitality of yourself in this moment, and then accepting the tone of the moment. Accepting that this might be a peaceful meditation, or it might be an agitated one, or you might be angry, or you might be sad. All of that is okay. Just if you can find some stability, like a mountain has stability, then you can experience your life in this moment with its vitality, just as it is. Nothing more and nothing less. I like to be available to whatever life is bringing me right now. So see if you can open yourself to being available to what is occurring right now. And often the last thing I do in a meditation is to bring myself to listen for the alignment that I can have with my intentions. What are my intentions for this life? What qualities am I trying to manifest? What is my North Star? What are the spiritual qualities I'm cultivating? And see if I can bring my whole self, body, heart, and mind, in alignment with my deepest intentions for my life. This alignment with your intention is a constant protection, and it's also a direction. May I learn how to love. May I learn how to forgive myself and others. May I align myself with acceptance of the things I cannot change. And I cannot change the past. May I direct myself towards the future, towards the things that are in my ability to make happen or to create. And as I work the steps and clear away the wreckage of my past, may that bring me clarity to know what is the wise decision at this moment. So I don't have a bell, but I will make a sound.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Judith. So, Judith, I've got like a sort of a two-pronged approach here. One is, how did Zen find you? Yep. And part two is, how did you find the rooms? And then, better still, let's go for a third part. The third part is, how do you blend part one and part two?
Okay, yeah, let's do it. When I was a child, not a child, I'm mostly a teenager, I had an affinity towards Buddhism and meditation. So, but I didn't know how to do it as a teenager. But I would drive to this shopping mall that had this gorgeous fountain in the middle. It was an outdoor mall. And I would sit there and meditate for like 5 minutes. And then I'd get so anxious that I would drive home. So I think I've had a affinity towards meditation. And also I was a hippie, because I'm old, and I was in the 60s and early 70s. That was the hip thing to be. And that had a wave of Eastern spirituality to it, which I was very attracted to. And I was also attracted to drugs and rock and roll. But the thing that's lasted through my whole life is the Eastern spirituality. And also the drugs and alcohol led me to 12-step. I met Katagiri Roshi, who's my root teacher, in 1973. And that kind of changed the direction of my life, because right away I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And I had a beautiful teacher. He's, if you know of Buddhism in America, he's one of the main teachers. And I was very, very fortunate to have what I call traditional teachings from someone from Japan. At the same time, I was getting more and more involved with drinking and drugs. I also overeat. And I had a crisis. It's all, one of the chapters of my book is about coming into 12-step. And I write the story very specifically. But and my asthma, my drinking and drugging, and trying to be a professional dancer in New York City, very high end, all came together in a big explosion. And I really couldn't, my health was so poor that I couldn't keep going on a very important tour that I was on when I was a dancer. And I knew then that I really had to change my life because it wasn't going, I was going towards, I could see that I might die. If it wasn't asthma, it would be drugs, or I was going downhill besides being kind of completely crazy. I came from a very violent, psychologically violent family. And I had sexual abuse as a child and a teenager, and I was really screwed up, I can say. So I started, I started because I was excuse me, this is so sad. I was called a fat dancer. I started in OA, Overeaters Anonymous, but within a week or two, they didn't want me to drink. And I knew, well, that wasn't going to happen. And so I started going to AA very early on. Those were merged. And in the 70s, so that was, I think I started in 77 in New York City. And this was before the wave of 12-step. I don't know when 12-step got really popular, but it wasn't in the 70s. And there were just a few hippies that had got to the end of their rope with drugs and alcohol that were there. And mostly it was very classic. It was in the basement, people smoking, older men smoking and drinking coffee up the wazoo. So I did that and OA, and then I began a 12-step life. I have been sober, I'm very happy to report, for 46 years. But in Al-Anon and in Overeaters Anonymous, there isn't the same type of measuring. So and also SA, I see someone put that in, and Sex Addicts Anonymous. It's very, very different type of measuring. So what I say is I've been using the 12 steps as the structure of my spiritual life for 46 years. I feel so grateful. Oh my goodness, grateful that I started Zen and 12-step at the same time. And I was sincerely committed to both at the same time, because what Zen doesn't have, steps 4 through 9 had, and also the emotional community, the community of support that Zen doesn't have, 12-step had. And I used it. And what Zen has is a very deep access to conscious contact. And I think in the big book, it does say that we can use our religions to deepen that aspect of our spiritual life. And so the combination of those two have been, so I can say, a miracle. And I've used them, I like to do my hand gesture, I've used them intertwining for all these years. And one last thing about intertwining is that in 2004, one of the Zen centers in the Minneapolis asked me if I would start a 12-step in Buddhism meeting. And that was kind of unusual then in 2004. I think San Francisco Zen Center had one. And I think there were a couple of books, 2 books out on this integration of Buddhism and 12-step. And also, if you're a Buddhist, you have to interpret the steps because the steps are in Christian language. So when I started to do this 2004, it wasn't exactly a meeting because I was always the speaker and I was using my professional life as a Zen priest to help support what I was saying. But that's when the two different modalities totally came together for me. So when I was speaking in 12-step terms, you could hear my Buddhism in the background. And when I was giving a Buddhist Dharma talk, if you were a 12-stepper, you could hear the 12 steps in the background. So they've merged in my life to a wonderful advantage.
Judith, excellent. And I like that little sort of intertwining, and sometimes that's what it really is, isn't it? It's the dance, that we participate in the dance. We don't anticipate the dance. We begin, and I personally, from a Zen background, with San Francisco Zen Center, right, and also with the 12 steps, find that intertwining is quite natural. The way I see it is, I've got one wing, which is my Zen practice, and then I have the other wing, which is my AA program, 12-step program. And, that keeps me, gliding a lot of the times. I tend to glide now as I'm around a wee bit, But anyway, back to Katagiri, the great Katagiri. And for those who haven't heard of Katagiri, I would suggest, please go online and check Katagiri out. He was a real Zen master. So what was Katagiri's take on alcoholism, on addiction?
Oh, that's funny. I don't think he talked about it very much. He wasn't that psychological. I'm going to say he didn't talk about addiction very much. He just threw you on the cushion and said, sit down. So that wasn't so great for me, being a trauma survivor. Sometimes sitting down is terrifying. But I was able to do it somehow with the support of the community.
That's interesting. And I agree with you as well, that those with trauma, to tell people with trauma to sit down and to be quiet can open up that can of worms. Yep. So what I'm wondering, for the viewers here is, how could you invite the viewers into the dance?
Well, you do both. You take very, very seriously working the steps. I can't, because if you just do Zen or Buddhism without the steps, it's likely to produce some kind of bypassing of your emotions and the wreckage of your past. We really need to address that straightforwardly and with kindness and with love. But I can also say that if you don't open the way you do from a Buddhist practice, your mind and your heart, making it really beyond yourself, then it's hard to let things go. So for me, Judith Ragir holds her resentments very tightly. Oh my God, I resented my parents for 40, 50 years, But if I have conscious contact with God, if I have a very deep spiritual life, I actually can let it go finally. I've digested it enough. Grist for the mill, rubbing, until it's just not that big a deal anymore because it's been worked through. Now that's very different than escaping our problems by going to a monastery and sitting and being in a blissful situation. That's very helpful, but you have to scrub out the karmic residue so that you can be free. So they work very well together. And you know, what pages, I don't even know what the step 11 pages are, 83 or 84, something like that. That has been my guideline for life. And that's true in any religion, in Buddhism, in anything. That you do something in the morning, during the day when you're confused or agitated, you stop and ask for guidance. And at night, you close the day. And you open and close the day in conscious contact with the part of you that's larger than your story. So you can't get better instructions than those.
And another thing that comes to my mind too from our Zoom conversation of last week, and which is again coming through tonight as well, and it's one that, you know, like the group to get the message, and that is what we talked about, was that softness, that kindness, and that compassion. How would you direct someone within your Sangha to tap into the kindness, the softness, and most of all, that compassion?
So one thing that's wonderful in Buddhism and in certain sects more than others is the compassion practices. So there are loving kindness phrases and visualizations. There Untangling, which is something I've done a lot, which is a Tibetan compassion practice about breathing in the suffering or accepting things you cannot change, and breathing out Buddha's compassion or kindness. So I think that you can actually cultivate through these practices what it feels in your body, what the body sensation is, to be gentle, to have loving kindness. Now, I came from a family that was not gentle and was not kind, and also really didn't have very good relationships. So part of my program life, has been cultivating and learning from others and from practices like the compassion practices, meditation practices. What does it feel like to love? What does it feel like to have a good relationship with someone? Oh, I'm learning this so much in Al-Anon. I just think Al-Anon is so everyone should do Al-Anon because it's about relationships. And in the end, our serenity and our peace and feeling good about ourselves does include having wholesome and healthy relationships. And the love of the community, right? They say we love you before you can love yourself. So I felt I learned how to love in meetings. I learned how to love through doing these cultivation techniques in Buddhism. And I think too, if you sit a lot like I have, you enter into Buddha's kindness or the benevolence of the world. The Tibetans call it the goodness that's actually the main underpinning of the world. You can actually touch that without trying. I mean, you are trying because you're sitting a lot, but it's inherent. It's inherent in you. We just have to feel it, find it, and let it come through. How's that?
That was excellent, and I'm sure His Holiness the Dalai Lama would also love to hear what you just said there, Judith. You know, I've been very lucky here in Belfast, and each time His Holiness comes to Belfast, I would be one of his assistants. And I remember, you know, his first visit to Belfast back in the year 2000. You know, my concern was about anger. You know, and you know, there's so much anger about. You know, and it's almost, you know, for me, you know, that people don't want to talk about their anger. So therefore they suppress it. And whenever they suppress their anger, they suppress it in an unhealthy way. And because they suppress it in an unhealthy way, then that anger tends to act out. Yep. So I remember on the last day of his visit back in 2000, I remember sort of sitting in a chair opposite him, and he was about to leave within the next hour. And I asked him, I said, Your Holiness, do you mind if I ask you a question? And he says, okay. And my question was about anger. Yeah, my question was about anger, right? And His Holiness replied to me he says, the big one was number one, forgiveness. Big one was forgiveness, that, it's about not owning your anger and not holding on to that anger, right? But about being able to let go of that anger. And then I asked him, I says, and what would the pathway be? What would the pathway be, for me? And he says that the path, for us all is kindness, to be kind. And he says, also remember, he says, it's always possible to be kind. And that's what I love about the Zen practice from the Sutra tradition. And I also love about the steps as well, is that, sometimes, just sometimes, there is that deep-seated forgiveness. For what people have done to me, and for what I've done to people as well. And I liked what you said there about the Untangling. But I don't know, just for the viewers who have not heard of Untangling, I was told one time that the Untangling practice, you need to be around a few years before you can actually use the Untangling practice. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, Untangling is a very difficult practice, and I think it comes in the middle part of your spiritual life. That's not where I would start, and I agree with you. And first, you have to get a taste for what loving kindness feels like, because if you don't have the taste, you can just be swamped. The psychologists will call it flooded by the suffering. So I would agree that, and it's in the Tibetan tradition, and it's used in the middle part of the path.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Also, I remember my good friend Paul Holler, who was the abbot of San Francisco Zen Center, Rishi Paul Holler. I remember him telling me way back about 1999, it was maybe 98, 99, that I had two lives. And of course, being from Belfast, I wanted to know, when do I get my second life? And he told me, you get your second life when you realize you've only one. And both my Zen practice and plus the steps, that's for once in my life, bringing my life into the here and now, I find that this is it. Yeah. And that for me is the healthy side of my Zen practice, as it embraces, my 12-step program, is, what's happening now is the most important thing. At the beginning, now you talked about, the four positions.
Foundations.
The four foundations of mindfulness. I think people also need to take that on board as well whenever they come to practice, is to be kind to themselves, be gentle with themselves, be soft with themselves, because I don't know about you, Judith, but, whenever I came into AA, I didn't really want to be here. You with me? I would have wanted to be anywhere else but in AA. But, thank God that AA was there. And then, the perfectionism, that sometimes can be such a curse. I don't know, did you ever come across perfectionism, Judith?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Perfectionism is about our efforts to control everything. And there's a great book, The Spirituality of Imperfection, and it was written by a 12-stepper. And I love that book. And one thing I'm learning, especially from Al-Anon, is how to let go of my control. And that's one of the reasons I go to meetings. I'm still going to meetings after 46 years, And I go to meetings because at every meeting, I'm reminded to let go, to trust, and I'm not in control, and I have to turn it over. And that's hard to remember. And there's a kind of softness that comes from that, going to a meeting and feeling that, oh yeah, the heart of the program is letting go and trusting. And for Buddhists, that the universe, the rhythm of the universe is taking care of you. So, I wanted to go back to anger. Would that be okay?
Oh, please.
Because my anger, I still am working with this terrible rage that I inherited from my family. And I've worked a lot on it. I just had this funny thing, which is I admitted that I had temper tantrums. And I said maybe 3 times a year. And then I asked my husband, how often do I have a temper tantrum? And he said several times a week. And I thought, oh God, that's so awful. I was totally embarrassed, I think we were talking about a different type of temper tantrum, but what I got from that is that I'm still, there's a part of the fire of rage or the fire of resentment that's still in me. And that is like the point of my program now and when I began this intertwining of Buddhism and the 12 steps, I kept saying to myself, well, where is step 4 through 9 in Buddhism? And in Zen, I could barely find it in Zen, although in the service of Zen, we do that little atonement prayer. But I couldn't find the actual work of changing our behavior patterns until I went to the Tibetans. And the Tibetans have a whole section in their path where you work on what they call interrupting your habit patterns or interrupting your karma. And finally, I said, oh, that's 4, 5, 6, and 7. I got a place to go. And what that is how do you actually, in the present moment or in this day, work, like, for example, with my anger. When things don't go my way, I get angry still. So I have to notice. So the first one is recognition, is noticing that I'm in the pattern of anger. The second one they call resonance, which is I have to get in touch with my higher power that can actually come in and help me with this. The third was what they call remedial, which is figuring out what should I do when I notice I'm starting to get angry or frustrated. And it's usually a spiritual practice that you do right there. And often it's a practice that I've decided beforehand that, oh, when I feel that, I'm going to do this spiritually. So I recognize I'm in the pattern. I reach out for my higher power. I do the spiritual practice I pre-decided to do. And the last one, I forget, it's the 4 R's. But you have to do that over and over and over and over. You vow to repeat that process over and over. And now the brain people are saying that, oh yeah, you can actually change the neurological pathways if you do something else. And Pema Chodron, so she's one of the main teachers of this style, she says, the more you do it, the more you do your habituated pattern, the stronger it gets. The less you do your habituated pattern, the weaker it gets. And that's how you crawl through letting go of what we call our defects of character. And then I found in step 4, 5, 6, 7, and step 7 is so much larger, though, even than the 4 R's. That's all the work you do to try to digest. But really, I think it's grace. When something gets lifted, it's not because I willed it or because I worked really hard. It's that my spiritual life has grown to a place where I don't need that pattern anymore. And I recognize that's a survival pattern from my childhood. But now I'm in a totally different situation, and it returned to the past, so to speak.